The morning air of Lexington was cold and silent in the spring of 1775. A pale mist hovered over the fields, wrapping the small town in a quiet tension that no one could fully explain. It was the kind of silence that comes before something life-changing. 16-year-old Thomas Whitaker stood by the wooden window of his family's farmhouse, staring into the fog. His hands were slightly trembling, though he tried to hide it. Somewhere in the distance, the faint but unmistakable sound of horse hooves echoed across the dirt roads. Behind him, his father, Jonathan Whitaker, adjusted his coat and reached for his old musket hanging on the wall. "Thomas," he said in a low, steady voice, "today might be the day everything changes." Thomas turned slowly. His father was not just a farmer anymore, not in his eyes. There was something different about him, something determined, something ready. "Are they coming?" Thomas asked. Jonathan nodded once. "The British. They're marching toward Concord, and they'll pass through here." A silence followed. It wasn't fear alone, it was realization. For years, the colonies had lived under British rule. Taxes kept rising, laws were enforced without representation, voices were ignored, and now people were beginning to resist. Thomas had heard the whispers, at taverns, in fields, in quiet gatherings at night. Words like liberty, freedom, and independence had started to mean something real, but today, those words would no longer be whispers. The first shot. As dawn broke, a group of colonial militia gathered on Lexington Green. Farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, ordinary men holding muskets, standing shoulder to shoulder. Thomas stood among them, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. He had never been in a battle before. He wasn't even sure if he was ready. Beside him stood his father. "Remember," Jonathan said quietly, "we're not here to start a war. We're here to stand our ground." Through the thinning fog, the British soldiers appeared. Their red coats were striking, organized, disciplined, and intimidating. They marched in formation, boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. An officer stepped forward and shouted something Thomas couldn't clearly hear, but the meaning was clear enough. "Disperse. Drop your weapons." No one moved. The tension tightened like a rope about to snap, and then a single gunshot rang out. No one knew who fired it, but that one shot shattered the silence forever. Into the war. Gunfire erupted, smoke filled the air, shouts, cries, chaos. Thomas felt frozen for a moment, then instinct took over. He raised his musket and fired. Everything became a blur. The smell of gunpowder burned his nose, his ears rang from the explosions. Around him, men fell. Some cried out. Some didn't move at all. "Fall back," someone shouted. The militia began to scatter. Jonathan grabbed Thomas's arm. "We need to go, now." They retreated into the woods, hearts racing, lungs burning. Thomas looked back once. Lexington was no longer peaceful. It had become the beginning of a revolution. A soldier is made. In the weeks that followed, Thomas could not return to his old life. The farm felt smaller. The quiet felt heavier. He made a decision. "I'm joining," he told his father one evening. Jonathan looked at him carefully. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "Then you'll do it properly." Thomas joined the Continental Army. He was no longer just a boy. Valley Forge. Winter came hard in 1777. Valley Forge was not just a camp, it was a test of endurance. Snow covered everything. The cold seeped into bones. Food was scarce. clothes were torn. Thomas sat by a weak fire, pulling his coat tighter around himself. His boots were worn out. His feet were blistered and bleeding. Across from him, his friend Samuel Carter tried to smile. "Do you think this is worth it?" Samuel asked. Thomas stared into the fire. "For freedom?" he said quietly. "Yes." But even he wasn't fully sure. Nights were the hardest. Men coughed. Some never woke up. Still, they stayed, because leaving meant surrender, and surrender meant losing everything. A new hope. One day, news spread through the camp like wildfire. The Declaration of Independence had been signed. Thomas listened as someone read the words aloud. "And all men are created equal." The words felt powerful, almost unreal. Samuel laughed softly. "So we're really doing this?" Thomas smiled for the first time in days. "We already are." The war continued for years. Battles were won, battles were lost. Thomas changed. He grew stronger, harder, more focused. He learned to survive. He learned to lead. But he never forgot why he started. Not for glory, not for war, but for freedom.